meeting for the purposes of adopting the 23-24 financial year budget and the indicative budget for the 24-25 and 25-26 years. So the purpose of the meeting must be clearly defined in the case of a special meeting. Councillors, I'm really pleased to say that firstly, in relation to conflicts of interest, that in accordance with section 150EF of the Local Government Act 2009, councillors do not have a conflict of interest if the matter relates to the making of levies of rates and charges by the local government. So, councillors, you'll be really pleased to know that. Before we start, we, on behalf of all our communities, acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today, and we pay our respects to our elders past, present and emerging. Councillors, I've talked about the purpose of the meeting and those conflicts of interest. Councillors, this meeting is very much procedural in terms of presenting the parts of the budget that are certainly policies and fees and charges, rates and charges, policies more broadly. There are a number of those. There's probably around 20. Obviously, each of you will note in your papers today that a bit of a change to the way we present our budget papers, in that the reports reflect and have the information relating to those particular motions as they are presented, rather than, I guess, previously we've had those as an addendum in some way, shape or form. So hopefully this is a more purposeful way of looking at your budgets. We hope so. Helen certainly hopes so, and thank you very much for the work in doing this. So, councillors, we will roll through those. What I will do, I will obviously move those or present those reports as we go along in relation to each of those parts. What I will do in terms of the statement of estimated financial position, which is 6.24, and 6.25, which is the adoption of the budget, I will certainly introduce Arun and then Helen to obviously speak to those more, I suppose you'd say, the crescendo of our budget at the end there, which talks about how we performed in this financial year and adopting the budget for the next financial year. So, councillors, that will be the process of the meeting. All right, councillors, the first one is obviously the Mayor's budget overview, and obviously in your papers you will see that we are considering a $292 million budget today, and this outlines our focus for the 13 communities in 23 and 24. This budget reflects the goals and priorities that underpin our 5-year corporate plan and is the fourth and final budget of our term here, so thank you, councillors, for that. This budget is a commitment to prioritise and deliver for all our communities. It's a big task, and it has its unique challenges, as it does each year. We provide many services across the area, which is the size of Tasmania, which we often share with our residents, and reliably maintains a pool of infrastructure assets valued at approximately $1.7 billion. So a large valuation of assets that obviously impacts our budget each year. While the provision of these services is not always visible, and certainly sometimes we don't promote that, they are essential to make this a healthy, safe, inclusive and livable region. And you will know through the advocacy work that you do as councillors, livability is at the forefront of all of those things we advocate for in terms of making sure that we stay competitive, and that people that are interested in being part of the Central Highlands, and certainly those people that live in the Central Highlands, have the value of a council that actually keeps focusing on livability. Clearly, this has been a challenging budget to deliver. We're operating in an environment of high inflation and shortages of labour, materials and supplies, and most of what we do is exposed to those costs more so than most people. The Australian economy is currently experiencing that same persistent higher inflation, rising interest rates and slower growth. And it's obviously, our Reserve Bank has problems predicting that. It's even more difficult for you as councillors to try and obviously reflect that in your budget. It's those broader factors which are impacting our residents, no different from anywhere else, and contributing to the cost of living pressures in household budget. So this budget has had to carefully balance the expectations of our communities, the region's progress and our fiscal responsibility to remain financially sustainable. And I thank certainly Chief Financial Officer Arun and our finance team more broadly for providing information and data that actually reflects the sorts of information that we need to make those decisions when we're considering certainly that equity. So, councillors, the nub of our budget today, councillors made a conscious decision to keep general rate increases to a minimum and has maintained them at the same level that was forecast in our long-term financial plan. These increases are below CPI inflation, which is currently reported at just over 7%. And I guess while we'll be doing this morning, a little bit later on this morning, obviously the national figure will come out again, the monthly figure. But certainly indications are, whilst I think it was 6.8 last month, it will be around the same. So we are experiencing obviously a period of high inflation. Next year, residential, rural and commercial sector general rates will increase by an average of 3%, and the increase for the coal mining sector will be 4%. We talk about capping here. Residents in the rural sector who experienced large land valuation increases in the last region-wide revaluation program may experience higher increases than the average. It would seem that on the basis of the information we have so far that there is not the continuation of an exponential rise of rural valuations in this financial year. However, as you know, valuations will be done the next year, so the DNR will be providing those. While the impact on each individual ratepayer will be different, the increase will be no more than 10%, which is reflective of our capping. This is to ensure that you'll pay no more than a 10% increase on your last bill, and this cap is significantly less than the 30% cap that was forecast in our 23-24 net long-term financial plan. And as you know, councillors, you've told community that while those indications are always in our long-term financial plans, we always have that ability to come back and be flexible in terms of adjusting that, and we have. Council has undertaken detailed review of its resource sector rating categories as part of the budget development this year. And these categories include coal mining, gas production and workers' accommodation, which will all be rated next year under new frameworks. This has been a process that we've been doing for the last 5 years. While you might think that that's a long time, the reality is a stitch in time, and we have made sure that we now have a more equitable system in terms of rating on tonnages and not so much on employees in some ways. And we are always constantly looking for a more equitable system for our rating, and these are the changes that we've made this year. In our utility charges, for refuse, water supply and sewage services, they will be subject to higher increases in the general rates, although refuse and sewage will still come under CPI inflation. The associated service provision of waste disposal, transfer station operation and recycling activities have been subject to significant cost pressures. You know through your advocacy work that certainly in regions we are most impacted in terms of logistical costs when it comes to these sorts of utilities, attracting the sort of workers that make it viable. So obviously this is part of our council business that is impacted the most. Residential refuse charges will increase overall by 5.5% next year, after we had been able to maintain that at 3% for the several years. For an average residential ratepayer, this is an annual increase of $28.50. Increases for sewage services next year will be 6%, which is also under that CPI inflation rate. This increase is required to ensure the maintenance, provision and replacement of the sewerage network without relying on support from general rates. And as you would know, in a broader context, these two utilities, where we formerly attracted 40% subsidy from the state government, we no longer receive. In terms of longevity, we are at that stage, and our council has diligently provided us a strategy that says there is a replacement program. We are doing a lot of that work. We are doing a lot of that work without subsidy from the state government, so obviously we are self-funding that. So obviously these are the areas where we are most impacted in terms of cost increases, hence the need for an increase in those charges. The increase this year of 6% means that for the average residential ratepayer, there will be an extra $44.65 on your sewer services. As we work to ensure the provision of secure water delivery across the region, particularly to our smaller towns, Council has increased water access charges by 9% and water consumption charges by 10% for next year. Now, councillors, these are the largest increases, but this is a determined attempt to making sure that in terms of a user pay system, and a subsidisation that we've had for a long time, that means that obviously we are moving back towards more of a user pays, and that obviously not all our ratepayers will be subsidising water, and this makes sure that our general rates can stay at a moderate level, and we move to a user pay system. You would appreciate that right across the region, the larger communities subsidise some of the smaller townships. We are happy to do that, but at some point the national competition policy says we must move to at least lower bound or upper bound I suppose, costs, and without going to long delivery, we are moving towards that lower bound, and we can achieve that over the next few years. Depending on water usage, the average residential ratepayer will see an increase of about $119 or about $2.29 per week to their total water bill after discount. So I guess as a total and a summary, when general rates are combined with utility charges, and we are a council where we are providing all of those, your general rate comes from your council, your utilities are provided by your council. The majority of residential ratepayers on the minimum general rate will see an increase of around 6% in their total bill after the discount. Now, you will have seen, obviously, from other local governments and certainly municipal councils in Queensland, that those increases generally have been around that figure and higher, and certainly in the instance where we are providing both the general rate and those utilities, we see ourselves as keeping our rates to a very, very bare minimum. Council continues to support our pensioners who live in our region and own their own homes by offering a 50% remission on all charges except for water consumption, and the Queensland State Government Emergency Management level, which we discussed yesterday. So we effectively provide a $1 million investment in the elderly people in our region, which is something that we are very, very proud of. Council also recognises the value for not-for-profit community and sporting groups in the region and supports their objectives by offering up to 100% general rate rebate to eligible organisations. So in our operating budget for 23-24, Council has budgeted an operating surplus of $5.1 million. The forward estimates of our long-term financial plan also forecast a surplus position for the next 10 years. It is important to understand that when we forecast our long-term financial position, we assume certain future economic conditions that don't always become a reality. This is one of the main challenges in setting a budget, particularly in the volatile economic conditions that now prevail. And you'll be asked, councillors, certainly today in your agenda for obviously a continuation of the policy that allows us to adjust that as we go through the year. As reported last year in my budget overview, Council has been impacted by the Queensland Local Government Grants Commission decision to reduce Council's financial assistance grants by 30%. These grants, funded by the federal government and managed by the state government, are the primary source of income for Council. We have said, and you know, that as a council, benchmarked against other resource councils and indeed the other 77 councils in Queensland, that we are one of the 5 lowest funded or grant-funded councils. So you are a council that funds yourself. And you will also know that, particularly as very, very strong advocates, whilst we haven't had, I guess, success with the Queensland Grants Commission, we certainly have been strongly advocating for certainly some certainty in respect to the payment of the financial assistance grants. And in some way, shape or form, I think we can say successfully, the federal government agreed only last week to pay the full 100% of the financial assistance grants for next financial year. However, as is always the conundrum, it's the time that is paid that affects your budgeting and our ability to actually forecast where we sit. So when we look at a $5.1 million surplus, clearly you can see that if you look at the amount of our financial assistance grants, that has a huge impact. If that is not paid in the year that we budgeted for, then obviously a slim $5.1 million surplus starts to look almost inadequate. So it's enough to look like we're supporting and maintaining what we need to do, but it also has within it contingencies that are affected by financial assistance grants, and we continue to advocate for a stronger and arguably a greater share of financial assistance grants to make sure that regional councils can operate well. Our capital budget this year is a very high $81 million in new capital works, with some carryover of $17 million from the 22-23 year. You will know that obviously the impacts of cost escalation and certainly the availability of contracts to complete last financial year has contributed to this carryover. However, obviously this year we are working on achieving a lot more works. As with many local governments, delivery of the current year's capital program has been constrained by those supply chain issues which I spoke about. So shortages in equipment, supplies and materials, and challenges engaging suitable contractors has all contributed to that carryover. Our capital program is strongly focused on renewals, but also includes upgrades to existing infrastructure, such as the externally funded upgraded Bonnie-Doon Road, which has come through the roads of strategic importance, and the replacement of the timber bridge on Withersfield Road, which is a significant concrete structure. Expenditure on new infrastructure includes the installation of the much-needed flood warning network gauges and flooded road cameras, which fortunately or unfortunately we do need. We're also investing in the pre-delivery phases of projects such as planning, feasibility, design and concept. It would seem in a world where competitive funding is the order of the day, it is sensible and practical that we obviously have a range of those plans and be shovel ready to take advantage of obviously the opportunities that come our way. Combined funding by the state and federal governments to the tune of $27 million will help council deliver key capital projects included in this significant program. And councillors, you also know that in the state budget that was provided on the 13th and 14th of June, obviously the Resources Community Infrastructure Fund indicated that certainly our local government area would benefit from another $33 million. There are some criteria around those projects, but that may have some impacts in our financial calculations this year, and certainly would be something that we'll be looking to push out into the future financial years. Borrowings, while Council's long-term financial plans that financially we are sound, we must continue to be diligent to maintain this position. The budget and the 10-year long-term financial plan indicate that we will undertake borrowings next year and in 26-27 to help fund our large capital works program over the next 10 years. The infrastructure demands placed on Council can sometimes be only met through debt. However, Council always consider the additional costs incurred by ratepayers when assets are acquired through borrowings, and I know Council has had a very strong focus on the right amount of debt and the right sort of debt with an intergenerational view very much at the fore of that. The use of debt allows ratepayers in the future who will benefit from Council's infrastructure depending on additional grant funding that may be received or surplus cash that becomes available. Our focus will be on reducing debt over the longer term, and by the end of the 10-year forecast, borrowings will reduce to about 1% of our total asset base, which is certainly an enviable position. Councillors, in conclusion, this budget is reflective of the current economic realities. Council recognises the cost pressures that household budgets are under, and the development of the 23-24 budget has been formulated with this in mind. You know full well that the federal and state government generally provide that relief to cost of living pressures. It is not our council. Unfortunately, we are one of those people that also suffer from certainly those costs of producing, the cost of delivering pressures, you might call them. And obviously this year that has been foremost in our minds as we've contemplated this budget. Significant effort has gone into keeping our increase in rates as charges as low as possible. I believe we've achieved that while still assuring that we meet the financial sustainability targets set by the Department of Local Government. This budget in our long is well positioned to manage future risk and opportunities and continues to support planning and advocacy for the future economic prosperity of the Central Highlands region. So thank you, councillors. I want to thank you all, certainly for the time that you've put into this budget process, which I think for most people may not be aware, starts in February. Obviously we are a local council whose now total budget is now nudging $300 million. We're one of the larger medium councils in Queensland. We're a significant, obviously, community in terms of central Queensland, and while our future and our prospects are bright, certainly there's a lot of diligence required in preparing this budget, and I thank you all for what you've contributed over those last months. I thank certainly Arun and his finance team, and Helen certainly in her preparation of these budgets, and I know I speak on behalf of councillors when I say that there has never been not enough information, and we would rather have too much than too little, and I thank you for that. Councillors, that recommendation is there that the Central Highlands Regional Council receive the Mayor's 23-24 budget overview report. So would someone happy to move by Councillor Roll, second by Councillor Brimmelcombe. All in favour? Against? Thank you, councillors. Carried. Councillors, 6.2 is our revenue policy. So, councillors, as I said, and I hesitate to say procedural, but they're very much parts of all the policies that we adopt on this day. And that relates to certainly the purpose of the revenue policy is to outline Council's strategic policy position in relation to its revenue raising measures that are included in the 23-24 budget. And this policy is prepared in accordance with the requirements of Section 104(5)(c) of the Local Government Act and Part 4, Section 193 of the Local Government Regulation. Councillors, that the recommendation is there that pursuant to section 169 and 193 of the Local Government Regulation, Central Highlands Regional Councils adopt the revenue policy for the 23-24 financial year. Is someone happy to move that? Moved by Councillor Brimblecombe, seconded by Councillor Moriarty. All in favour? Against? Thank you, councillors. That's carried. Councillors, revenue statement. Councillors, once again, in accordance with section 169(2)(b) of the Local Government Regulation, council's budget must include a revenue statement. The purpose of this is to outline and explain the revenue measures adopted in the budgets relating to the making and levying of rates and charges, the cost recovery fees and other fees and charges. So councillors, and obviously relates to the differential rating categories more broadly. So councillors, there's a whole heap of supporting information to that. So the recommendation is there that pursuant to those sections 169 and 172, Central Highlands Regional Council adopts a revenue statement for the 23-24 financial year. So I'm happy to move those. Moved by Councillor Burns, seconded by Councillor Carpenter. All in favour? Against? Thanks, councillors. Right, councillors, 6.4 is our differential general rates, and that is a lot of columnised information that relates to, I think, let me go to the end, 74 different rate categories. And obviously the rates in the dollar contained within there, so that pursuant to the section 81 of the Local Government Regulation, we adopt the categories into which rateable land is categorised and the description of those categories as in set out in paragraph 2.1b of the revenue statement for the 23-24, and that pursuant to sections 81.4 and 81.5 of the Local Government Regulation, Central Highlands Regional Council delegates to the Chief Executive Officer the power to identify the rating category to which each parcel of rateable land belongs. And as you know, councillors, this is very important to subsequent legislation and policy within the budget document that relates to certainly some changes that we've made. So they're the differential rates. Councillor, someone happy to move that one? Moved by Councillor Brimblecombe, seconded. Councillor Rolfe, all in favour? Against? Thank you, councillors. Councillor, 6.5 is the limitations on increases of rates and charges levied. Councillors, that is that resolution relates to the resolving of the limit of the increase in general rates 23-24 for each differential rate category, subject to certain conditions. Councillor, I draw your attention to, in the discussion current issue, in that financial year, the revenue statement outlines the operations of capping and lists any conditions that apply to its application in circumstances there. So in 23-24, you've got increase on the limitation cap, 30% for the coal mining and other mining and extractive industries, no cap for workers' accommodation, no cap for petroleum leases, and 10% on all other categories not listed above. The revenue statement outlines the 22-23 revenue statement adopted as part of the 22-23 budget outlines some eligibility restrictions relating to the following, where the area of a rateable assessment changes by way of amalgamation or separation of rateable assessment, where there has been a change in the valuation of the rateable assessment other than the valuation in the whole of the region during the current previous financial year. As part of the review and update of this 23-24 revenue statement, these two eligibility restrictions have been removed. I think that's very important. Councillors, you would have been aware during the year, certainly we had instances and examples and situations brought to us by some of our ratepayers, particularly around succession planning. Thank you, councillors, for your diligent review of this. And the only restrictions that will apply in our 23-24 revenue statement are as follows: where a property is assigned to another differential rating category, so if it actually physically moves, which is not in the same class of category unless the differential rating category is changing class from rural land only because of the adoption of the defined urban area policy and the maps contained within, and that's a subsequent policy within your papers today, or where the rateable assessment is levied the minimum general rate for the current year, or where the general rate was calculated on a valuation to which Section 50 of the Land Valuation Act 2010 applied, for instance, a developer's concession, or where the general rate was calculated on a valuation pursuant to Section 274 of the Land Valuations Act. The revenue statement allows properties to move within a class of general rates and still receive the benefit of capping. These classes of category previously consisted of 26 classes, which has been reduced to 10 as per the table in the resolution. This amendment is an administrative improvement and does not reflect a change in the application of capping for the ratepayers included in the relevant class. And I think, Councillor, you made it very clear that our intention is always to keep it fair, and those changes to those particular restrictions make that fairer if there is a change that happens within the financial year. So, councillors, that recommendation, is someone happy to move that?
Can I please have a comment, please?
Yep.
So what about the revenue statement? That would be stated in the revenue statement. This isn't a revenue statement, this item. It is. So is what you just spoke about also stated in the revenue statement?
It follows in the revenue statement,
yes,
Councillor.
so,
Yep.
Okay, so what I'd like to say, and I think it'd be hypocritical of me if I didn't actually voice this today, is that I've been very vocal throughout the budget workshops that I would support a 5% capping rate. It has been proposed for a 10% cap, and I do acknowledge that originally we had predicted a 30% cap, so I thank councillors who have indicated a 10% cap. That's a huge improvement on what we first predicted, but for me it hasn't gone low enough. I believe that livability is not just about the nice to have things, it's about being affordable to also live in our region. And I was also very vocal about the capital budget at 81 million plus 17 million carryover. I believe that we could have not tried to deliver, because I've been very vocal. I do not believe, and with respect to the ELT who believe they can deliver that, I have never seen that amount of a capital budget ever delivered. And I do not see any change in the economic climate where we're going to get contractors, supplies, employees to deliver 81 million plus the carryover of $17 million. I believe that we could have reduced the capping further from the 10% with not being so ambitious in capital works. We calculate a budget in simple layman's terms by seeing what we need to get and then seeing how we're going to get it. So I won't be voting for this, and I think I'd be hypocritical if I did, because I've been so vocal about livability being about how people can afford to live here, not the pretty parks and gardens and the glossy nice to have things. Thank you.
Yep. Thank you, Councillor Seifert. And I can only respond there, I guess, in relation to, I hear your comments. I'm not necessarily sure it relates to this particular policy part, but it's good enough. You've made your comments there. There's certainly the issue you raised there about in terms of the contemplation of a capping. They're not done specifically for one particular land class or one particular sector class. A budget is always about the holistic budget and who pays, and that's always been, I guess, the conundrum of all our budgets, is making sure in terms of equity that if someone's not paying, well, who is paying? And we just make sure that, obviously, where we can, that we make sure that it's been an egalitarian position of the Central Highlands is that whilst we are a very, very big region, and I talked about the cross-subsidisation certainly within utilities, we're very happy in larger communities to make sure that we subsidise other communities. It is not fair to contemplate different parts of our sectors not paying their share. So our deliberations are always around making sure that equity comparison is as fair as it can be. So obviously the preparation of this budget was on certainly 10% capping for rural property, but you can see there also that that doesn't apply to resources. That's 10%. That's 30%. So there is a couple of mechanisms there that we actually use to make sure that we can actually make that as equitable as possible. In terms of the capital budget, obviously we've had those conversations about our team and our organisation being able to deliver that capital works. It changes from year to year depending on the nature of those projects, but in no way does certainly our budget change just based on the change to the amount of capital we deliver. There are certainly the operational parts of this organisation that we're obliged to keep doing. So I hear what you're saying. We had those, obviously, those strong voices from you and others about different parts of it, as all councils did contribute in that meeting, in those subsequent workshops. So obviously this particular section here is only on the limitation on those rates and increases, but we have actually noted your point. So Councillor Daniels.
Thank you, Mayor Hayes, and I also just wanted to, I guess, note that I'll be voting against for a similar, voting against this motion for a similar reason. I had advocated for a lower cap, taking into account the significant valuation increases that occurred a couple of years ago, and really just wanting to slow the impact of that valuation as it flows through to the ratepayer, and spread that out over a few more years. It would have been my preference, as I did verbalise in the workshops, for a lower than 10% cap, but I realise that the majority are supportive of the 10% cap. Thank you.
And thank you, Councillor Daniels. And as I think, so that your words aren't lost, and Councillor Cyphers, obviously the long-term financial plan indicated a higher change, and certainly council were very keen to, all councillors were very, very keen to have the capping reduced to an amount that we thought was appropriate, like I suspect we always were going to do. In respect of spreading it out over years, I guess the path to equity started a long time ago, and certainly in our information sharing and our stakeholder engagement, we made it quite clear that certainly in the rural instance where there was only literally a 20%, I suppose, contribution for an 80% share of the valuation, that was a little bit seen as inequitable, and certainly this change is a slight one, and I suppose arguing for a 10% cap was obviously a way of easing that and probably achieving what you've asked for. So in a way, not as quick as you'd like to, but certainly moving that way. Councillor Cruz.
I would just like to say that obviously I came in after most of the discussions did actually take place, but I am aware of the capping impacts from previously voted upon budgets. But I'd just like to say we also have the responsibility to look beyond the here and now, to plan to the best of our ability for future viability and to avoid any potential financial volatility and extreme cost shift to future residents and ratepayers. So just speaking to that, whilst my personal belief is that potentially it may feel comfortable to express something slightly lower, but we do have to, or what I am looking at is the future viability and the cost shift of future ratepayers and residents as well.
Thank you, Councillor Cruz. Right, Councillor Muriel.
Thank you very much, Mr Mayor, and take your wise words, Councillor Cruz. But I will also be voting against this for the same reason that I was also, it took me much deliberation, but I did support the 5% capping for rural, and I would just like to express thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Muriel. All right, councillors, well, 6.5 is, as I said, a limitations on the increase of rates and charges levied, so that recommendation is there. Can I have someone move that, please? Moved by Councillor Rolfe, seconded. Councillor Carpenter, all in favour? 1, 2, 3, 4, you're voting for 5, and 6, me. Against? 3. And councillors, would you like your vote recorded? Yeah, please. Right, thank you, councillors, carried. And thank you, councillors, for your contributions. Councillors, special rates and charges. Now, councillors, this relates to a lot of, and probably is quite peculiar in some local government areas, but we certainly have special rates around certainly some road accesses. Now, councillors, in your papers you would have seen that this recommendation was to adopt them as a whole. Well, we're actually going to do that separately. We're obliged to do that. So, councillors, if you could just bear with me here. There's not too many of them, but the recommendation in the first instance, and these are roads like the Lilyvale Road, which is the access road to certainly places like Kestrel, Gregory, and potentially some new sites on that road. The Lilyvale Road is obviously an agreement between those those resource companies and council. The Yan Yan Road, which is also back towards, certainly from that same mining area back towards Capella, is also another part of that. And then Encroy Road and the Oakey Creek Town Mine rates are in relation to certainly Thierry. But the first one is the Lilyvale Road, which is a maintenance special rate. And obviously you can see those the descriptions there which indicate a lot of mining leases. So, councillors, this is in relation to the agreement for the maintenance of that road. So, the recommendation there, Money, have you changed those to reflect? Yes, as a special rate as follows. So, councillors, that's the resolution that will sit at the top. Someone happy to move that? Moved by Councillor Daniel, seconded Councillor Brimblecombe. All right, councillors, and that obviously relates to just that Lilyvale Road. Councillors, it's been moved and seconded. Those in favour? Against? Thank you, councillors. Carried. Right, the Yan Yan Road maintenance special rate. So, councillors, that's it there at the top there. Someone happy to move that Yan Yan Road rate? Moved by Councillor Rolfe, seconded Councillor Cypher. All right, councillors, moved and seconded. All in favour? Against? Thank you, councillors. Carried. Right, the next one is the Encroy Road. Lucky we've got a exemption from conflict of interest today. I see we're pretty close to some of this stuff. So once again, there a lot of mining lease references there in the description. That road there, someone happy to move that? Moved by Councillor Daniel, seconded Councillor Burns. So that's been moved and seconded. Councillors, all in favour? Against? Thank you, councillors, that's carried. Right, the Oakey Creek Mine, the Town of Thierry special rate. As you know, councillors, our organisation obviously provides services in that town. Councillor, someone happy to move that, please? Councillor Moriarty, seconded Councillor Cruz. Councillors, that's been moved and seconded. All in favour? Against? Thank you, councillors. Carried. And you will see, councillors, in your little your handbook there, certainly we had a good discussion about certainly some improvements in that town of Thierry too, which you can reference later on. All right, councillors, back to the agenda. 6.7 is our water utility charges. So the recommendation is there that under sections 92 and 94 of the Local Government Act and sections 99 and 101 of the Local Government Regulation, we make, council make the levy and water utility charges as follows, and they are columnised there. So certainly the access charge for all schemes, and then certainly a variation in the actual the multiplier units, the connection where the above multiplier is applied to the nearest dollar, water access charges for vacant land, and the water consumption charges that we spoke about in the preamble. So, councillor, someone happy to move those? Moved by Councillor Brimblecombe, seconded. Councillor Rolfe, all in favour? Against? Thank you, councillors. Carried. 6.8 is our sewer utility charges. So, councillors, that one is a very small column. So, the residential charge and the non-residential charge on the first pedal is $8.23, and then each additional pedestal is $4.73, and the vacant land is $8.23, and the sewer utility charges be applied as further detail in paragraph 2H of the revenue statement that we adopted earlier. Is someone happy to move those charges, please? Moved by Councillor Cypher, seconded Councillor Carpenter. All in favour? Against? Thanks, councillors. Carried. Waste utility charges, that pursuant to sections 92 and 94 again, and section 99, we make the levy and waste utility charges set out as follows. The waste management charges range there from residential properties, rural properties where serviced, public accommodation, workers accommodation, caravans, parks, commercial, industrial, hotel, tavern, mining leases, all other properties not listed or referred to, and properties outside the above-mentioned collective service area. So, councillors, that is there. The refuse collection charges in the next column. So, council has determined it will make refuse collection service available in the following defined areas: so Springshaw, Rolleston, Capella, Bluff, Dingo, Jeringa, Emerald, Anakie, Blackwater, Tieri, Comet, and other designated areas to which the council determines it will provide a refuse collection service. We had a good talk about that earlier this year in our strategy. Councillor, someone happy to move those waste charges? Moved by Councillor Daniel, seconded by Councillor Brimblecombe. All in favour? Against? Thank you, councillor. That's carried. Now, the issue of rates and charges notices. So the anticipated dates of issue are listed below for each notice period, and that's the date for the first half rate notice August 2023 and the second in February 2024, and then our water notices October 2023, April 2024, or in conjunction with the rate notice for the half year ending 30 June and 31 December. So someone happy to move those? Moved by Councillor Cruz, seconded Councillor Brimblecombe. All in favour? Against? Thank you, councillors. Carried. Payment of rates and charges. Council, that basically provides ratepayers 31 days after the day of issue for the notice to pay their half-yearly rates and water charges. And so, obviously, to receive the prompt payment discount of 5%, that's a term I've got to read a couple of times, prompt. So I guess that's a key thing if you want to get a 5% discount. Councillors, the recommendation is there that pursuant to section 118 of the Local Government Regulation, Central Highlands Regional Council adopts a due date by which the rates or charges must be paid as 31 days. So someone happy to move that? Moved by Councillor Rolfe, seconded Councillor Daniels. All in favour? Against? Thanks, councillor. That's carried. The discount, which we referred to, that prompt thing. Councillors, the discount shall be applied to the rate or charge net of any rebates available other than the following rates and charges which are not subject to the discount, which is water consumption charges, a special rate or charge, the state emergency management, fire and rescue levy. So that's what it won't apply to. That pursuant to section 130 of the Local Government Reg, Central Highlands Regional Council will adopt an early payment discount of 5%. To be allowed to any ratepayer that pays all rates and charges in full, including arrears, by the date set. So, councillor, someone happy to move that? Moved by Councillor Moriarty, seconded Councillor Rolfe. All in favour? Against? I don't think I've ever seen a council vote against the discount, but anyhow, I was going to say, you must have seen it all, councillor, so I've got to tell you.
I wasn't.
No, thank you, yeah. All right, councillors' interest. The pursuant to section 133 of the Local Government Regulation, council upon interest at a rate of 8% per annum. Councillors, you remember that Arun and Helen brought to us, obviously, information in relation to, I suppose you'd say, the commercial rates, which are significantly higher at 11.64, and council has made, I think, a healthy decision to keep that at 8, as being very mindful, certainly, of our economic conditions, and certainly to encourage people. So, councillors, that there is set there at 8%, subject to your moving and seconding. So can I have someone move that, please? Moved by Councillor Carpenter, seconded Councillor Burns. All in favour? Against? Thanks, councillors. Carried. Rating, rebates and concessions. So, councillors, that pursuant to section 122 of the Local Government Regulation, Central Highlands Regional Council grants the concession set out in paragraph 2.2 of the revenue statement. So that revenue statement details the following concessions and applicable eligibility criteria. So pensioners, entities whose objectives do not include making a profit, such as community groups, churches and sporting clubs and others, deferred payment arrangements, mining claims overlapping residential tenure, mining claims waste management charges, quarries and class concessions. Also, you will see there, council will continue to grant the above listed concessions based on the applicable eligibility criteria, which are outlined in the full revenue statement, including the addition of the following concessions. That's for the rural ratepayer family succession for ratepayers in the differential categories of 45 or 46 rural irrigation, where the ratepayers has obtained the land by way of transfer, separation or amalgamation of rateable assessment, sale from or to a close family member or legal entity controlled by a close family member. The transfer or change must have occurred during the 21-22, 22-23 of 23-24 financial year, and as a result of the transfer or change of ownership, Council's limitation on the increased cap of general rates did not apply. And this is, Councillors, a result of certainly that change in that concession and community commitment that you made to obviously make that fairer. So I think that's a fair result. So, Councillors, that's the concession. So that concession is under Section 122, and further that person pursuant to Section 257, Central Highlands Regional Council delegate authority to the CEO to make decisions in accordance with that revenue statement as on a case-by-case basis. So, Councillor, someone happy to move that? Moved by Councillor Moriarty, seconded by Councillor Carpenter. All in favour? Against? Thank you, Councillors. Debt policy. That pursuant to Section 192 of the Local Government Reg, the Council adopts a debt policy. Obviously, that has to be included, obviously, in your adoption of your budget to recognise borrowings as an important funding source for capital works, and that the full costs associated with acquisition of long life assets or significant renewal and upgrade of existing assets should not necessarily be borne entirely by present day ratepayers. To ensure intergenerational equity, funding of these activities should also be contributed to by future ratepayers who have access to the services. So, Councillors, that's the fundamentals of this one. Someone happy to move that, please? Councillor Brimblecombe, seconded. Councillor Rolfe, all in favour? Against? Thank you, Councillors. The application of competition policy, and obviously, Councillors, we referred to this in certainly relation to water and wastewater, and our, I suppose, intention to get to at least lower band in our under our competition policy requirements. So for 23-24, the following activities have been identified as business activities for Council for the purpose of the National Competition Policy legislative requirements, and that's water, sewer, airport, waste and sale yards. The following three are obviously significant businesses, and that is water, sewer and waste. The water and sewer business meets the threshold of 10,000 or more premises being connected to a water service as per Section 19(2) of the Local Government Regulation. The 22-23 budget expenditure for the waste business activity forecast as part of the 22-23 budget review 3 process indicates that the 9.7 million expenditure threshold will be exceeded at 30 June 2023. The 23-24 budget reflects the business exceeding this threshold, and Council is now required to review the process to reform the waste business in accordance with Chapter 3, Part 2 of the Local Government Regulation. So you can see, Councillors, slowly but surely, that influence of that policy starting to creep up on larger communities starting to grow over those thresholds. Now, I'm not suggesting that thresholds need to be reviewed, although I think there is a process to do that, but obviously that is what contributes to certainly consideration or factoring in to those costs when our organisation brings back to us the need for our utilities charges to meet these responsibilities. Council already applies the competitive neutrality principle to the water and sewerage business by way of application of full cost pricing, and we're on a pathway there. The pricing practices of these businesses' activities is moving towards full cost pricing and a price path which is reviewed annually and has been implemented that aims to achieve full cost pricing over time. So, Councillors, we're on that pathway today, and that's reflected in some of those charges. So the recommendation is that the Central Highlands Regional Council adopt the application of the competition policy for our 23-24 financial year. Someone happy to move that? Moved by Councillor Daniels, seconded by Councillor Moriarty. All in favour? Against? Thank you, Councillors. Carried. Our investment policy. The policy applies to all councils' invested funds in accordance with the investment powers under Part 6 of the Statutory Bodies Financial Arrangements Act, the SBFA Act, and the Statutory Bodies Financial Arrangements Regulation. Pursuant to Section 101 of the Local Government Act, Council derives its investment powers from the FBFA Act and the FBFA Regulation. Council has been allocated a Category 1 investment power which permits investment in a specified range of investments. So, Council, you'll recall that recently there was a review of that. I think the LGA called for, I guess, a review of the opportunity of perhaps enhancing that, given certainly the value to councils that had strong cash positions, and I think for the time being we're retaining our category 1. So, councillors, that recommendation there is pursuant to section 191 of the Local Government Regulation. Council adopts the investment policy for the 23-24 year. So, is someone happy to move that? Councillor Rolfe, seconded Councillor Brimwell-Combe. All in favour? Against? Thank you, councillors. Carried. The financial hardship policy. The purpose of this is to provide for the eligibility criteria and application process by which council may grant certain concessions or provide any assistance to ratepayers and customers having difficulty paying rates and charges or other fees. The concessions granted and assistance provided in accordance with the policy are designed to provide ratepayers and customers with time to seek advice and address the causes of their financial hardship. So section 121C of the Local Government Regulation allows council to provide concession to ratepayers where the payment of rates and charges will cause hardship to ratepayers. The intent of the policy is consistent with section 5 of the Revenue Statement, which you adopted earlier, which sets out principles for granting concessions for those rates and charges. Equity, by having regard to the different levels of capacity to pay within the local community, extent to which a community sector is providing support to the wider Central Highlands community, the same treatment for ratepayers with similar circumstances, transparency by making clear the requirements necessary to receive concessions, and flexibility to allow council to respond to local economic issues. So, councillors, you'd be very much aware that we have ratepayers that avail themselves of this particular policy, and as it says there in there, a certain equity is provided there for all of our ratepayers to access this in their time of need. So, councillors, that recommendation there that we adopt that. Is someone happy to move that? Moved by Councillor Moriarty, seconded Councillor Rolfe. All in favour? Against? Thank you, councillors. Carried. Defined urban areas policy. Councillors, there's a whole swag of maps that went with this. We have, I guess, at times addressed those. There's been very few changes to some of those. The main purpose of the policy are to define the urban areas for use in defining the defined water supply areas and defined sewerage areas for water, sewer and wastewater utility charges as referred to in the council's revenue statement, to define the boundaries of and land within each town within council's local government area. So irrespective of the size of the community, some of those small villages or towns certainly have a defined area, and to provide guidance in determining the appropriate differential rating category to apply to land or property where a determining factor is the location of the property in a town. So that recommendation, council, just adopts those for the financial year. So someone happy to move those, councillor? Moved by Councillor Cruz, seconded Councillor Moriarty. All in favour? Against? Thank you, councillors, that's carried. The concealed water leaks policy, it's an interesting topic, isn't it? Councillors, the purpose of the concealed water leaks policy is to detail how council may provide financial assistance to ratepayers via remission for unusually high water consumption charges due to a concealed water leak. And councillors, you are very much aware we get regular incidences and examples of this happening, and in most cases they're generally very, very bona fide, and obviously this is an opportunity of making sure we respond to that well, and there is some recourse for people. So that Central Highlands Regional Council adopts that policy for the financial year. Is someone happy to move that? Moved by Councillor Rolfe, seconded Councillor Cruz. All in favour? Against? Thanks. Councillors, carried. The rates and charges collection policy. So, councillors, we often discuss that often at our financial reports. The management and recovery of outstanding revenue is an important aspect of council's financial management function and helps to ensure all ratepayers are contributing equitably to council services without an unfair burden being placed on those ratepayers who meet their obligations in full. So that is obviously at each year, in accordance with section 118 of the Local Government Regulation, council resolves the period within which rates and charges must be paid. The objectives of the rate and charges collection policy is to set out council's principles in relation to the management of debt and to provide procedural direction to council officers that is consistent and ethical in accordance with the parameters and requirements of the LG regulation and other legislation. The policy guides the administrative process that will be used in the collection of overdue rates or charges, which may include payment arrangements and or selection of various recovery actions, including the sale of land in accordance with the legislative requirements. So, councillors, that is there, the rates and charges collection policy for our 23-24 financial year. Someone happy to move those? Moved by Councillor Brimcombe, seconded by Councillor Daniels. All in favour? Against? Thank you, councillors. Carried. Refund and adjustments for rates policy. The purpose of this refund and adjustment policy is to provide direction in determining when and how council will seek to recover or reimburse amounts undercharged or overcharged for rates and charges. This policy applies to current and previous rate periods and rates and charges issued to ratepayers of council under section 92(1) of the Local Government Act. The policy does not apply to the refund of payments made under the Register of Commercial and Cost Recovery Fees, or the Fees and Charges Register as it's known, for 23-24. So, Councillor, the recommendation is there that we adopt that. So I'm happy to move that. Moved by Councillor Carpenter, seconded Councillor Brimblecombe. All in favour? Against? Thanks, Councillor, that's carried. So the budget policy. The budget policy is the discretionary policy adopted by Council to provide a framework for the preparation, adoption and amendment of Council's budget and to ensure the annual budget is legislatively compliant and financially sustainable. The policy applies to Council's corporate budgeting activities, including the annual adopted budget and any subsequent budget reviews. So, councillors, that's there for you to consider. The Central Islands Regional Council adopts a budget policy for the 23-24 financial year. So I'm happy to move that. Moved by Councillor Daniels, seconded Councillor Brimblecombe. All in favour? Against? Thank you, councillors. That's carried. And councillors, I will now ask our Chief Financial Officer, Arun, to introduce his team and to talk to us about the statement of estimated financial position of the current financial year that we find ourselves in, 22-23, just for a moment to deflect away from the consideration of our 23-24 budget. Thank you, Arun.
Thank you. Through Mr. Mayor, good morning, councillors. In accordance with Section 205 of the Local Government Regulation 2012, a statement of estimated financial position for the previous financial year must be presented as part of the annual budget meeting. The attached financial statements present the estimated financial position of the Central Highlands Regional Council for the year 30th of June 2023. The council is, the most recent forecast of the budget review you would have done is in early June, where council adopted budget review 3. This is the most latest forecast, and we're not proposing to change the budget, but it is an estimated position of what we think the financial year end will be in terms of its operating surplus and capital position. With that said, I will now invite Manager of Finance, Helen Kirby, to present the report in detail to council. Thanks, Helen.
Thank you, CFO. Through the Chair, and good morning, councillors. At the end of this current financial year, it is estimated that Council will record an operating surplus of approximately $3.1 million. There is no change expected to the $53.2 million capital program that was adopted at Budget Review 3. This estimated operating position is based on the Budget Review 3 surplus of $136,424 and has been adjusted for material budget variances that have arisen since the adoption of the final budget amendment on the 6th of June. The increase in the operating surplus from Budget Review 3 reflects the net impact of an increase in revenue of approximately $2.2 million and a reduction in expenses of approximately $800,000. The increase in revenue relates to the recent advice from the federal government that 100% of the 2023-24 financial assistance grant will be paid to Council before the 30th of June this year. Council had previously budgeted to receive 75% of next year's grant in advance. The net reduction in operating expenses reflects an increase in depreciation and a decrease in materials and services expenses based on a desktop review of actuals and commitments performed for the period up to the 18th of June. It is very important to note that this estimated financial position is only indicative, and final verification is subject to the end of financial year processes and completion and audit of the 2022-23 financial statements. The audited financial statements will be certified in October in accordance with the 2023 External Audit Plan. As the estimated financial position has been used as the opening position for next year's budget and long-term financial plan, any material changes based on the final audited result may impact the budget and forward year estimates over the life of the 10-year plan. A recommendation is made that Council receives and notes the estimated financial position for the 2022-23 financial year. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Arun. Thank you very much, Helen. Can I say, councillors, it's probably always a bit ironical sitting here looking at a good result by any measure, but certainly I guess the sum of the parts is greater than the whole here, and I guess you will know during this financial year the management that's been required, certainly through the budget review process, to get to this result. Clearly, when I said at the start of this meeting about the impact of financial assistance grants, a change to that contributes significantly to be able to do this. But what it does show that despite that, you have within your council team, and certainly you as councillors and a board, that you've managed to actually managed to balance a budget, a significant budget, with a very, very slim, I guess you'd say, contingency. And that has required a lot of hard work, and a lot of hard work from certainly the team internally within council. So I thank them for that. Obviously, the budgets we set last year, the parameters we set hold us in good stead. We get to the result we need to. And I think I can recall the words of a very new councillor talking about needing to do things now to make sure things down the track certainly add up. So I guess that is a classic example of that. So the recommendation, councillors, there is that pursuant to section 205 of the local government regulation, we receive and note the statement of estimated financial position for the 22-23 financial year. Would someone like to move those? Moved by councillor Rolfe, seconded Councillor Moriarty. All in favour? Against? Thank you, councillors. That's carried. Right, councillors, this is item 6.25, which is our 23-24 budget. So I'll hand over to Arun, certainly to lead us through this.
Thank you. Through Mr. Mayor. Councillors, the proposed budget for 2023-24 also includes the long-term financial plan, which has financial sustainability targets, as you are aware, from the local government regulations. Over a 10-year period, and on average, the proposed financial sustainability ratios meet the required targets. And councillors, you would be aware we currently measure targets, which are 3 targets, and from next financial year onwards, they're going to 9 targets, 9 financial sustainability targets. Debt management over the period of 10 years is sound and balances the right funding mix to ensure council invests in maintaining and upgrading assets in a timely manner. The exemptions on rate capping, as you previously councillors have noted in previous reports, has been quite simplified as well. Considering the challenges faced by rising inflation and Queensland CPI, the increase in general rates has been proposed to be under CPI. The proposed capital budget for next year is reflective of council's large asset base and upgrades to critical infrastructure assets. In closing, and before I invite the Manager of Finance, I would like to thank you, Mr. Mayor, Madam Deputy Mayor, and councillors for their direction and leadership they provided during the budget process. I would also like to thank Madam CEO for her leadership and guidance during the process, and I want to extend my gratitude to my fellow executive team members and their respective teams, and in particular, Manager of Project Management Office, Kim Downey, the whole of Management Accounting team, and lastly, but not the least, Manager of Finance, Helen Kirby, for her hard work, diligence, and expertise she has provided. I will now also invite the Manager of Finance to present to Council this report in detail. Thank you.
Thank you, CFO. Through the Chair. This report presents the final resolution of the overall adoption of Council's 2023-24 budget. In adopting the annual budget, Council must comply with sections 169 and 170 of the Local Government Regulation, which sets out certain elements relating to the budget that must be prepared and adopted at the budget meeting. The resolution contained in the tabled report references all of these individual elements. The first element relates to the financial statements, and the legislation requires that the budget is prepared for the budget year and the next 2 financial years on an accrual basis. The financial statements must include a statement of income and expenditure, which is also referred to as a statement of comprehensive income, a statement of financial position, or referred to as the balance sheet, a statement of cash flows, and a statement of changes in equity. These financial statements are included in the table report at attachments 1 to 4. The legislation also requires that the budget must also include a long-term financial forecast for at least 10 years. Council's long-term financial plan and accompanying detailed report is provided as attachment 5 in the tabled report. Two elements of the overall budget adoption resolution relate to the revenue policy and the revenue statement, which provide the basis for the levying of rates and charges next financial year. As required by the legislation, these documents were adopted by individual resolutions earlier in this budget meeting. But for completeness, however, they are also being included again in this resolution as part of the overall adoption of the budget. The overall adoption of the budget resolution, in accordance with section 169 and 170 of the regulation, also requires three final additional elements. One of these elements is the reporting of the three financial sustainability measures covering the period of the budget and the next 9 financial years. These sustainability measures, are the operating surplus ratio, the asset sustainability ratio, and the net financial liabilities ratio. The results of these measures over the 10-year period is provided at attachment 6. Another element is the reporting of the change in the value of rates and charges to be levied between the new budget and the previously adopted budget. This change, which is expressed as a percentage, is provided at attachment 8 of the report. The final element required in accordance with the legislation for the adoption of the overall budget is the provision of an estimated activity statement for each business activity where Council applies the Code of Competitive Conduct. Council has 5 business activities: airports, sale yards, waste, sewerage and water, and attachment 9 provides the individual activity statements for each of these 5 businesses, covering the budget and the next 2 financial years. There is no specific requirement for a capital program budget to be separately outlined in the overall adoption of the budget resolution, as it is already incorporated and referenced in the financial statements and long-term financial plan. However, for transparency, Council has included the 3-year capital budget as an element of the budget adoption resolution, and details of the capital budget by program is provided at attachment 7 of the report. As the Mayor outlined earlier, the 2023-24 budget reports an operating surplus of $5.1 million. The total budget for expenditure on capital projects is $98 million, which is comprised of $80.8 million for new annual projects and $17.2 million relating to projects continuing from this current financial year. Council will use a mix of funding sources to deliver the capital program, including $26.9 million in capital grants from state and local governments and borrowings of $10 million. The total 2023-24 budget expenditure is $292.4 million, which includes capital expenditure, operating costs and the repayment of debt. The budget reflects a combined rates and charges increase of approximately $4.44 per week for an average residential ratepayer on the minimum general rate after the 5% discount. Overall, Council's long-term financial forecast and sustainability measures highlight that while there are challenges and financial risk to manage, Council maintains a sound financial position into the medium to long term. That concludes the report, and a recommendation is made that, pursuant to the relevant sections of the local government regulation, Council adopts the 2023-24 budget. Thank you.
Right. Thank you very much, Helen. I guess I draw Council's attention to, obviously, the attachment at the end of your budget papers, which there is that pursuant to sections 34, 169, 170 and 171, we adopt the Central Highlands Regional Budget 23-24 budget, incorporating the Statement of Comprehensive Income, which is attachment 1, the Statement of Financial Position, attachment 2, the Statement of Cash Flows, attachment 3, the Statement of Changes in Equity 4, Long-Term Financial Forecast 24 to 33, which is Appendix 1 of Attachment 5, the Revenue Statement, also adopted separately earlier, the Revenue Policy, the Measures of Financial Sustainability, the capital expenditure budget, the total value of the change expressed as a percentage in rates and charges levied in the previous budget, the estimated activity statements for each business activity as incorporated in the application of competition policy. And councillors, that is it. Is someone happy to move it, please? Moved by Councillor Brimblecombe, seconded Councillor Moriarty. All in favour? Against? Councillors, carried. You have a 23-24 budget. Thank you, everyone. Brilliant. Councillors, can I just say we've certainly acknowledged Arun and his team. Can I acknowledge the executive leadership team for certainly their input and their diligent budgeting around, I guess, a large capital amount of projects this year. but can also thank our CEO, who creates an environment here that allows that to happen here, and certainly from our councillors' perspective, it gives our workshops, our deliberations and our preparation of our budget the necessary flexibility that makes sure that all of the things that councillors bring, all of the things that the organisation brings become a really, really proper mesh of what we need to get to. I think it's Councillor Cruz, you're getting a lot of airtime this week, suggested the other day, it's a very fresh set of eyes. It's a process that allows certainly good planning to happen to get better outcomes down the track. So, councillors, whilst we're adopting the 23-24 budget, this is certainly a journey of making sure that the interests of all of Central Highlands are considered in our budget, and that certainly whilst things may change on a broader basis, always, certainly the interests of Central Highlands ratepayers already first and foremost, and this process certainly makes us a sustainable region. So I thank you, CEO, for providing that environment. Councillors, that is all in our special meeting. As I said, the capital projects are there as an attachment. Councillors, thank you very much for that robust deliberation over the last 4 months and providing your support for this budget today. It gives a very, very clear direction for our next 12 months and certainly for our next 10 years. Thank you all, and I'll declare the meeting closed at 10:12.
Just before we go, Mr Mayor, you're thanking everybody else and everyone else is thanking everyone else. But I'd like to thank you too on behalf of myself and the other councillors for leading us in those discussions as well. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Yep, thank you, Councillor Moriarty. Well, councillors, I should have waited for that. Councillors, I'll declare the meeting closed at 10:13. Thank you very much, everyone.